I felt lost between his two personas, the ruthless protector who had just taken lives, and the man who was occasionally tender in an inexplicable way. "Amelia," Kian said, his voice utterly strained. "Are you all right?" I nodded, struggling to breathe. He knelt before me, his ice-cold finger tracing my cheek. "No one is allowed to touch you," he whispered, his voice soft but holding an absolute finality. Then he pulled me into a tight embrace. In those arms, amidst the chaos and the death, I felt a strange sense of security. That's when I realized I had fallen in love with him. I loved a man who had declared his possession over me, with blood, with violence, and with his very life. It wasn't a declaration of love, but a vow. A sentence I was ready to accept. I remember precisely the day horror knocked on my door. It wasn't a polite knock, but a fierce kick, piercing the rotten door that had protected me and Leo throughout the poor years. The sound of splintering wood rang out dryly, tearing the silent night of the outer slum, followed by the smell of mold and dust that had deeply seeped into every corner of our cramped apartment. My heart, already heavy with the burden of livelihood, now pounded wildly, as if wanting to leap out of my chest. Leo. My brother. He was trembling, his deep blue eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, now filled with primal fear. He was only 18, but he was trapped in a swamp that I, no matter how hard I tried, couldn't pull him out of. A massive debt, dozens of times the money I made in a year doing every odd job. 4 tall, fierce men rushed in like living nightmares. The smell of cigarettes, sweat, and a sharp, acrid odor, the smell I guessed was of metal and blood, clung to the air, suffocating me. I backed away, hugging Leo tightly, feeling his uncontrollable trembling transfer to me. My throat was dry, every breath became difficult, as if the air around me had thickened, squeezing me. The dim streetlights shone in, turning their terrifying faces into blurred shadows, increasing their dreadfulness. "You have 2 days, little girl," one man, with a long, gray scar running along the corner of his eye, growled, "or your brother will pay with every bone in his body." His voice was deep, like the sound of grinding stones, each word a cold knife blade cutting my hearing. 2 days. That was a verdict, not an ultimatum. I knew what they would do. I had heard the whispered stories on the street corner, the chilling warnings about debtors who couldn't pay, about deaths with no explanation. I couldn't let that happen to Leo. My brother was everything I had, the only lighthouse in this dark life of mine. In that moment, I felt utter helplessness. Fear crept into every cell, but with it was a fierce spark of determination. I would do anything to protect my brother. When my last spark of hope was about to fade, a door. Another door, made of polished black mahogany, finely carved, opened. I still couldn't believe my eyes. It was a torrential, rainy afternoon. I was desperately searching for help at a dilapidated lawyer's office, after being rejected by countless others. Rain lashed my face, blurring the tears and the fear. I clearly remember the damp smell of the pavement, the distant ambulance siren. A smartly dressed woman, her hair neatly tied back, sharp eyes hiding contempt, extended a cold, metallic business card to me. On it was only a name and an address. No phone number, no title. Just a mysterious invitation to a completely different world. That was how I met Kian. The first time I saw that man of power, I felt a cold current run down my spine, not from fear, but from an unexplainable awe. His office was on top of a skyscraper of glass and steel, proudly reaching high in the city center. The scent of sandalwood and expensive leather filled the space, a complete contrast to the moldy smell I was too familiar with. Soft golden light from crystal chandeliers poured down, highlighting the exquisite architectural lines and the expensive artworks on the walls. I had thought I had nothing left to fear, but when the office door opened, I suddenly realized I was wrong. Kian sat there, on the sleek black leather chair, his back to the large window overlooking the entire city sinking into a brilliant sunset. His shadow was strongly imprinted on that magnificent scene, like a dark king reigning on his throne. Every gesture of this man exuded absolute authority, an invisible power I had never seen in anyone. His jet black hair was neatly slicked back, revealing a high forehead and eyes as cold as ice, yet hiding a mysterious light, like a bottomless abyss. His face was angular, perfectly sculpted, with a resolute line at his jaw. His crisp, perfectly ironed white shirt further highlighted the solid muscles hidden under the fabric, showing a physical strength that didn't need to be flaunted. He said nothing, only slowly turned his chair, his commanding eyes sweeping over me, stopping at my red eyes and old clothes. In that moment, I felt naked, all my fears and despair exposed under his penetrating gaze. I stood still, like a confused deer amidst a dense forest full of predators. I didn't dare breathe, afraid that a small sound would shatter the suffocating tension. The silence lasted infinitely, each second passing like a century, making my heart pound so hard I could feel every painful beat in my ear. Finally, a deep, resonant voice rang out, breaking the stillness. "Amelia?" His voice was smooth, yet held a frightening weight, like the roar of a wild beast that had been tamed but still retained its wild instinct. "I heard you have a debt that needs to be settled." I nodded, trying to swallow to regain my voice. "Not me. It's my brother, Leo. He was just a foolish child. Please, forgive him." My plea was weak and lost in the large room. Keon raised one eyebrow, a small gesture but full of authority. Debts must be paid. Always. His gaze fixed on me, as if weighing my value, pricing every part of my existence. "But I can offer a solution." His solution wasn't a sum of money, but a contract. A bizarre contract, written in complex legal language I almost didn't understand. 6 months. I would have to live with Keon, in his mansion, as Leo's guardian. In exchange, all of Leo's debts would be cleared. He would guarantee Leo's absolute safety, a life without worry, where no one would dare touch him. What did I have to do? No one clarified. Only vague clauses about companionship and care. I felt a shiver run down my spine. That wasn't a job. That was a deal with the devil. "There will be other terms," he said, his voice calm. "Terms that you will understand clearly when you accept." The man of power picked up a file, placing it on the glass table in front of me. The folder cover was pitch black, without any markings, but exuded a deadly mystery. "Think carefully. This is not a game." Think carefully? Did I have another choice? Leo was standing on the edge of the abyss. His life was threatened. I looked into Keon's eyes, searching for a spark of humanity, a sign of weakness. But I only saw an indescribable coldness, a terrifying determination. His world was a bottomless pit, and I didn't know if I could survive it. But for Leo, I would throw myself into that abyss, despite everything. "I agree," I said, my voice hoarse, feeling like I had just sold my soul. The scent of sandalwood now seemed more suffocating, like a thick smoke enveloping me, submerging me into a strange world full of danger. I knew nothing about Keon, except the absolute power he held. I also didn't know what I would face in that house for 6 months. The only thing I knew was that I would do anything to protect my brother, even if the cost was anything. Even if it was myself. The man of power smiled, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk, but it made me shudder. "Welcome to my world, Amelia." His voice was like a verdict, a mysterious oath, echoing forever in my mind. And I wondered, was that a promise or a sentence? I couldn't distinguish the boundary between the two, just as I couldn't distinguish the boundary between the salvation and the captivity this mysterious man was bringing. I stood there, amidst the luxurious room, the fear still intact, but now mixed with a chilling curiosity about the future. The scent of sandalwood and expensive leather, once again, wrapped around me, like an invisible chain, slowly tightening around my neck. I felt like I was stepping into a dream, or rather a nightmare, from which I didn't know if I could ever wake up. Everything around me changed, from the soft golden light of the room to the cold gaze of the man before me. My life, from that moment, no longer belonged to me. It belonged to Keon and his dark secrets. Life in Keon's mansion was a startling contrast to what I had ever known. From the cramped, damp apartment in the slums, I was pushed into a world of absurd luxury. The huge black iron gate, intricately carved with classical European dragons, opened automatically when the luxury car carrying me arrived. The smooth engine sound blended with the sound of gravel under the wheels, creating a strange symphony of wealth. Even the air here was different, cleaner, carrying the scent of flowers and a little salty ocean aroma from afar. The mansion. It wasn't just a house, but a fortress. An ancient building of gray stone, standing proudly on a hill, surrounded by perfectly trimmed French gardens. Every corner of the house exuded majesty and coldness, as if it had witnessed hundreds of years of mysterious stories and power. The scent of old oak, scented candles, and a faint jasmine fragrance from the garden, all blended to create an atmosphere both luxurious and mysterious. I was led into a room. No, a separate apartment within the mansion. Spacious, with large windows overlooking the lush green garden. The furniture was made of polished walnut, upholstered in high-grade leather. The satin silk bedsheets were cool, so soft that I thought I was dreaming. I had never touched anything so soft in my life. But that luxury didn't bring a feeling of safety. On the contrary, it made me feel more trapped. This was a golden cage, beautiful and dangerous. Every time I stepped on the thick Persian rug, I felt my steps were out of place, like an outsider invading a place that didn't belong to me. Keon rarely appeared. Our meetings were usually at dinner, in the large dining room with a long, polished mahogany table, which could seat 20 people, but usually only had the two of us. Silence enveloped those meals, only occasionally broken by the delicate clinking of silverware. Crystal chandelier light shone down, making the silver tableware and high-grade porcelain sparkle. I tried to observe him. That was my skill, something I didn't know I had until I was pushed into this situation. The ability to remember details, the ability to read people through the smallest actions. Keon ate slowly, elegantly, without any unnecessary sound. The man of power's cold eyes always swept over me, as if he were reading my thoughts, understanding every fear and curiosity hidden within me. I wondered if he realized I was trying to find clues, trying to string together the fragmented pieces of who he was. The black silk tie was tightly knotted around his neck. A white gold wristwatch sparkled under the light. Everything was frighteningly perfect. His scent, a mixture of sandalwood, leather, and something sharp like mint, always lingered in the air, haunting me. I noticed the small things. He always sat in a specific position, facing the main door. Even when speaking, his gaze never lost its alertness. There was a thick, old, ancient book always placed on his desk, with old Latin characters I couldn't read. But what I noticed most was a faint scar on the back of his left hand, running down to his wrist, looking like an old burn. A scar telling a story I could never know. I also began to notice subtle changes in how he treated me. Initially, it was complete coldness, only brief instructions. But gradually, there were moments, though very rare, when he showed unexpected gentleness. Once, when I clumsily dropped a fork, he didn't rebuke me, just simply signaled the server to bring another. Another time, when I was reading in his massive library, he walked past, paused briefly, and gently adjusted the shawl slipping from my shoulder. His finger brushed my skin, leaving a strange, burning sensation that startled me. I wondered, was that concern, or just a natural habit of a man of power? Perhaps he also noticed my fear. One night, I woke up from a terrible nightmare. The image of a beaten Leo haunted my mind. I burst into tears, my choked sobs breaking the stillness of the room. Keon appeared immediately after, like a ghost. He stood at the door, his eyes darkened. I saw a flicker of something in the man's cold eyes, a discomfort, or a pain. "Are you all right, Amelia?" His voice was lower than usual, mixed with a little worry. I nodded, trying to hold back my crying. Leo. I dreamt of Leo. The man of power said nothing, only slowly approached the bed. He sat on the edge of the bed, raising his hand. I flinched, instinctively. But that hand only gently touched my hair, caressing it with surprising tenderness. Your brother is safe, he said, his voice softer, as if comforting a child. No one can touch him. In that moment, I felt a strange warmth running through my body. That gentleness was completely contrary to the image of the cold tycoon that I had assigned him. I wondered, was this the other side of this mysterious man, or just a tactic to keep me? His scent, now, was no longer just luxury, but something else of safety, of a haven I had never had. However, suspicion always existed. I secretly explored the mansion when he was absent. The massive library was where I spent the most time. I didn't find anything clear about Keon, but I found books on international law, on the underground economy, on the history of large crime families. These books were not for an ordinary person. There was a locked room at the end of the west corridor, the wooden door reinforced with steel and always guarded. I felt a deadly danger from that place. One afternoon, when Keon was having a meeting in his office, I accidentally walked past. The door was slightly ajar. I heard his voice, cold and sharp, talking about restructuring and internal purge. Traitors have no place in this empire, he growled. I heard the dry sound of a gunshot from afar, echoing eerily through the soundproof glass. Then Keon continued, his voice carrying a terrifying ruthlessness. And make sure all traces disappear. I don't want any weakness exposed, especially not in front of those who are not involved. I knew he was referring to me. In that moment, I felt disgusted with myself. How could I feel a little safety, a little attraction to such a man? A man who could order killing with a calm tone as if ordering food. It was madness, my warped survival instinct. My heart, it was betraying me. It was resonating with the protection of a predator. I abhorred that feeling, abhorred the way I gradually got used to the presence of this dangerous man, the way I began to seek the rare moments of tenderness from him. It was a forbidden attraction, a dark curse tightening its grip on me. The contradiction in me grew stronger. I was the conscience of this story, but my conscience was being warped by fear and forbidden attraction. I realized Kian was not a simple man. He had his own rules, principles that were perhaps built from untold sorrows. In short conversations, I once heard him mention a child. A little girl who was abused, an old story that darkened his eyes. No child deserves to suffer what they didn't cause, he said, his voice deep with sadness, unable to hide his indignation. And no woman deserves to live in fear. That was a statement that surprised me, a small but extremely important piece about the man's core motivation. Was that his obsession? A weak point I could touch? Or just a curtain hiding the ruthless nature of the man of power? Every day that passed, I discovered one more small detail, a new fragment of Keon's complex world. I realized I was no longer just a frightened captive, but I was becoming a part of that world, an observer, an analyst. My skill, the ability to connect seemingly unrelated points, was being sharpened. I saw old notebooks in his office, with the clumsy handwriting of a child, crossed out mercilessly. I saw him stop for a long time in front of an old, faded photograph, in which there was a young woman with desperate eyes. That made me wonder, what past shaped this man? Kian created a solid layer of protection around me, an invisible but impenetrable wall. He didn't allow me to leave the mansion grounds alone. My phone was monitored, every call, every message was checked. I was a prisoner, but a protected prisoner. And I wondered, was that a promise, or a sentence for my freedom? I couldn't escape, just as I couldn't fully understand this mysterious man. The false peace in Kian's mansion did not last long. I knew, deep down, that the ghosts from Leo's past would never let us go so easily. The smell of trouble, though effectively suppressed by Keon, still lingered somewhere in the air, like an old scar throbbing painfully. One fateful afternoon, as I was sitting in the library, trying to forget reality with a classic novel, the mansion's alarm suddenly blared, tearing the stillness. A jarring, chilling sound, like the cry of a wounded monster. My whole body froze. My heart seemed to stop. I knew. I knew it had happened. What I had always feared had come. Gunshots rang out. 1, 2, then a series of continuous, rapid shots, echoing from the main gate, accompanied by the sound of breaking glass and the screams of the guards. The blood in my veins seemed to freeze. My hand trembled so much that the book fell to the floor, creating a dull sound in the large room. I heard urgent footsteps outside, vulgar shouting, and the acrid smell of gunpowder smoke seeping through the door crack. They were the ones who pursued Leo. They had found me. In the first few seconds, I could only stand there, completely motionless from fear, like a small rabbit caught in a predator's sight. I didn't know what to do, where to go. All my senses were paralyzed, except for the fear screaming within me. But then, survival instinct surged. I had to find a place to hide. I rushed under the table, curled up, trying to become invisible. The damp, moldy smell of the old oak under the table now strangely brought a sense of safety, even if it was just an illusion. The gunshots and shouts got closer and clearer, as if they were moving straight into the mansion. I heard the heavy sound of boots on the marble floor, their angry snarls. "Where's the girl?" A raspy voice growled. It was the scar-faced man, the one who came to my house. He hadn't forgotten me. They wanted to use me to threaten Keon. An outrage flared up in me, a small, tiny flame before a great storm. They dared to do this? They dared to invade this place? The library door was suddenly kicked hard, making a terrifying bam sound, bursting open, knocking the hinges off. Dust and light from the hallway poured in, bringing with it the terrifying figures of 3 thugs. They scanned the room, their eyes sharp and full of hatred. When the disgusting eyes of the scar-faced man met mine, I knew I couldn't escape. "Found her!" he roared, a cruel smirk clearly visible on his face. "The boss will be very happy to know we bring this gift to the man." Another man, with a dragon tattoo wrapped around his arm, lunged towards me. I closed my eyes tightly, preparing for the blow, for the pain. The smell of cigarettes and stale beer assaulted my nose, making me nauseous. I felt his rough hand clutch my hair, yanking it hard, pulling me out from under the table. My scalp was stinging, as if being ripped apart. I whimpered, but no plea escaped my throat. I wouldn't let them see weakness. Just then, a figure shot through the door, fast as lightning, and powerful as a whirlwind. Keon. He appeared like a god of vengeance. His black hair was slightly messy, but the man of power's eyes were blazing with cold, deadly fury. The scent of sandalwood and steel was now more pungent, blending with the smell of blood and gunpowder, creating a symphony of death. Not a word, not a warning. Keon lunged at the man clutching my hair. A punch as hard as a hammer blow to his jaw, causing the man to stagger, letting go of me. Keon did not stop. He turned, kicking the second man's knee, making him collapse with a scream of pain. The remaining man pulled out a knife, but Keon was faster. He clenched his wrist, cruelly twisting it backward, causing the knife to clatter to the floor. Then, with a decisive movement, he broke the man's wrist, a dry, chilling crack ringing out. His scream echoed throughout the room, like a horrifying music. I stood there, stunned, trying to breathe. This was the Keon I had vaguely sensed, the Keon of the underworld, the Keon of absolute power and unyielding ruthlessness. He was not the gentleman who occasionally adjusted my shawl. He was a predator, a dark king, and those who invaded his territory would pay with blood. Blood. I saw blood splattered on the marble floor, bright red and gruesome, reflecting the glittering chandelier light. The metallic smell of blood mixed with the smell of old oak and gunpowder smoke, creating a disgusting mixture. The scar-faced man, the leader, backed away, his eyes showing fear. He did not expect Keon to be so utterly brutal. You're crazy, he yelled, trying to escape, but Keon blocked the exit. He approached the scar-faced man, each step slow, heavy, like a grim reaper approaching. The man of power's eyes were icy, without emotion, but filled with extreme hatred. No one, Keon growled, his voice deep, like a thunderclap, is allowed to touch what belongs to me. And that was when I realized that mine was not just the mansion, not property. It was me. I was his. The cold feeling running down my spine was no longer just fear, but one of absolute possession, a threatening affirmation. Keon grabbed the scar-faced man's neck, lifting him easily, as if he weighed nothing. The man's eyes deeply focused on the enemy. You crossed the line, the man of power whispered, his voice holding a terrifying strength more than any scream. And therefore, you will pay. Sound of breaking bone rang out, followed by a short scream, then silence enveloped. Scar-faced man fell to the floor, motionless. Blood spread widely on the expensive Persian rug, forming a dark red, gruesome streak. Keon let go, without any expression. He looked down at the three fallen men, his eyes vacant. I saw an icy gleam flash in his eyes. He turned to look at me, his eyes dark. In that moment, I found myself lost between his two personas, the ruthless protector who had just killed mercilessly, and the man who occasionally showed unexpected tenderness. The strong, metallic smell of blood filled the air, but his sandalwood scent was still stronger than everything. Amelia, Keon said. His voice returned to normal, but still hiding extreme tension. Are you all right? I nodded, trying to breathe. I couldn't say anything. All my senses were overloaded. He slowly approached me, as if comforting a wounded animal. The man of power knelt in front of me, reaching out to gently touch my cheek. His finger was ice cold, but his eyes held clear concern. No one is allowed to touch you. The man's voice was gentle, but held an absolute determination, an oath. He embraced me, pulling me into his arms. I felt the firmness of his body, the familiar scent of sandalwood and steel enveloping me. In his arms, amidst the chaos and death, I felt a strange safety, an absolute protection. That horrified me. How could I feel peace in the arms of a man who had just taken lives? I cried, hot tears rolling down my cheeks, soaking his shirt. But it wasn't a cry of complete fear. It was a cry of release, of pent-up tension, and also extreme confusion. I detested myself for feeling a little safety, a little peace when Keon was holding me. He gently lifted my chin, his eyes locking onto mine. Everything is over, he whispered, his voice husky, but containing a difficult-to-understand tenderness. You belong to me, Amelia, and I will never let anyone harm you. Those words, once again, were a promise, but also a declaration of possession. Right amidst the brutal scene, with blood scattered and death present, I felt a current run down my spine. His ownership was not just a burden, but an impenetrable shield. I was torn between this fear and forbidden attraction. And I wondered, was that a promise of eternal peace, or a sentence for my final freedom? Keon picked me up, carrying me out of the blood-stained room and dead bodies. I felt his strong, steady heartbeat through his shirt. He put me on the bed in my bedroom, then leaned down. His eyes swept over my face, as if memorizing every feature. His hand gently stroked my cheek, then moved down to my lips. A kiss. The first kiss of the man of power and me, in the silent night, after the gunshots and bloodshed. It was not a gentle or romantic kiss. It was a kiss of possession, of power, and of a silent vow that he would never let me go. A kiss carrying the smell of blood, gunpowder, and sandalwood, a horrifying but irresistible blend. That night, after the explosion of violence in the library, I couldn't sleep. The smell of blood haunted every fitful dream, mixed with the image of Keon's cold eyes when he struck. My whole body ached, not from physical wounds, but from the immense mental shock. My internal conflict became more intense than ever. I had witnessed a horrifying scene, seen Keon turn into an unforgiving monster. Yet, when the man held me in his arms, I felt strangely safe. I hated myself for accepting that protection built on blood and violence. The next morning, Keon had disappeared. The mansion was submerged in a terrifying silence, different from the stillness of previous days. No noisy guards, no sounds of servants moving, only me and an extreme emptiness. I knew he was gone. Gone to settle the remaining people, the ones who dared to touch his property. Man of Power's war had begun, and I, now, was the one waiting. The waiting was a cruel torture more than direct fear. Every tick of the clock on the wall echoed in the large room, like a hammer striking my mind. I paced back and forth in the room, looking out the window, my eyes vacant. The sky was gray, heavy, as if the whole universe was holding its breath waiting for the result of this battle. I couldn't eat or drink. My throat was dry. Every breath became difficult. I tried to imagine what was happening. Keon, with his ruthlessness and deadly efficiency, facing those who dared to threaten me. Violent images reappeared in my mind, making me shiver. But this time, the fear was no longer just for myself. A strange feeling, a deep worry, began to creep into my heart. I was afraid for Keon. Afraid the man would be hurt. Afraid he wouldn't return. That thought terrified me. How could I worry about the one who brought me into this dark world? I sat by the window, looking out at the quiet garden, trying to find some sign of life, of peace. But I only saw the shadows of fear and violence lurking. Afternoon fell, bringing the cutting cold of the night. Darkness gradually covered the room, like a black curtain swallowing everything. I didn't dare turn on the light. I wanted to sink into the darkness, wanted to escape reality. Hours passed, as long as centuries. Every small sound made me jump. The sound of a branch hitting the window, the wind whistling through the door crack, all became frightening signals. I began to wonder, was I still me? How much had Keon's world changed me? I hated the way I gradually got used to his presence, to the Man of Power's brutal protection. I hated the way I started looking for him, even though I knew who he was. Then, just when I almost lost all hope, when the first rays of dawn began to appear, shining through the velvet curtains, I heard the main door open. Heavy footsteps, but not Keon's usual decisive steps. Something was wrong. I rushed out of the room, running down the stairs. Keon stood in the main hall, under the crystal chandelier. He was no longer perfect as usual. His pure white shirt was now stained red with dried blood. A deep, gaping cut on his shoulder, blood still seeping out, soaking the shirt fabric. His face bore a look of extreme fatigue, his eyes sunken, but the sharp look was still there, reflecting victory and a dull pain. The smell of blood and gunpowder, along with the smell of damp earth and sweat, enveloped him, creating a horrifying contrast with the familiar sandalwood scent. I stopped short, my heart tightening. Fear had turned into a sharp pain, a deep worry I didn't know I could have for this man. I was no longer afraid of him. I was afraid for him. Afraid he had paid too high a price. "Keon!" I exclaimed, my voice hoarse, rushing towards him. He looked at me, a tired smirk appearing on his face. "I told you, Amelia. No one is allowed to touch what's mine." His voice was weak, but still contained absolute determination. I supported him. His body was heavy, almost collapsing into me. I felt the warmth of his blood seeping through my shirt. A horrifying feeling mixed with the urge to take care of him, to protect him. I no longer thought of him as my captor. He was the one who fought for me, who sacrificed for me. I helped Keon up to his bedroom, a large and dark room. He slumped onto the edge of the bed, breathing heavily. I rushed into the bathroom, taking out the first aid kit. My hands trembled as I tore off his blood-stained shirt. The wound was deep, terrifying. It's not too bad, Keon said, trying to appear calm. Be quiet, I snapped, my voice breaking with emotion. Don't say anything. I started disinfecting the wound. The cold antiseptic touched his skin, making the man wince. I saw him clench his teeth, but no groan escaped the man. The man was frighteningly strong. As I bandaged his wound, I noticed the old scars on Keon's body, the marks of past battles. He had lived a life of violence, of danger. And I, now, had become a part of that life. Keon looked at me, his eyes unexpectedly softening, a weak light of tenderness appearing in those cold eyes. Are you not afraid of me, Amelia? I am afraid, I said, honestly. But I couldn't say the word. But he understood. I saw an understanding flicker in the man's eyes. He raised his hand, gently touching my cheek. I cannot promise you a world without darkness, Amelia, he said, his voice husky with fatigue, but I can promise you that I will never let the darkness touch you. Never. You are mine. Forever. That was not a declaration of love. That was an oath, a declaration of ownership, uttered amidst pain and blood. But in that moment, it had more power than any declaration of love I had ever heard. It was absolute protection, a commitment sealed with blood and sacrifice. I had hated the way I was drawn to his ruthlessness, but now I couldn't deny that I was absolutely protected by him, with his very life. I rested my head on Keon's chest, listening to his heartbeat steadily, strongly. The smell of blood and sandalwood, now, carried an entirely different meaning. It was no longer fear. It was life. It was love. It was a dark, existence-defining symphony. And I wondered, would I hate myself when I realized that, in that moment, I had loved this man? Was that love a salvation, or a final, eternal sentence for me in his dark world? The following days, Keon spent time recovering. The wound on his shoulder was deeper than I thought, and I took care of him meticulously. That was the time we were closest, not through words, but through actions, through small gestures. I saw a different Keon, a man who was weaker, more vulnerable, even if only for a short moment. He accepted my care, without a single complaint, his cold eyes now often looking at me with an indescribable tenderness. The smell of antiseptic, ointment, and his leather now became a familiar part of my life. Keon, true to the man of power's promise, eradicated all threats completely. He not only extinguished the ones who attacked the mansion, but also eliminated the entire network that trapped Leo in debt. I didn't know the details, but I knew Keon broke an important rule in his world. He transformed his underworld into a safer place, no longer having room for those who exploit the weak, especially women and children. That was his atonement, not for me, but for his own haunting past, for the sorrow he had once witnessed. Leo, my brother, was finally completely safe. Keon arranged a new life for him in another city, far from the temptations and dangers of the old world. A small, cozy apartment, a stable job, and a chance to start over. I still talk to Leo often on the phone, hearing his happy, hopeful voice. He was no longer the frightened and desperate child. He was free. That was the only thing I wished for, and Keon fulfilled it, exceeding all my expectations. 6 months. Our contract expired. I still clearly remember that day, when I was sitting in the library, trying to read, but my mind was completely empty. The smell of oak and scented candles filled the room. Keon walked in, not saying a word, just handing me a black envelope. I opened it. Inside was a check with a huge amount of money, enough for me and Leo to live comfortably for life. And a letter. Only a few lines, handwritten in Keon's strong and decisive script. You have completed your contract, Amelia. You are free. Live the life you deserve. But remember, your world always has a place that belongs to me, and I will always protect it. I looked at the check, at the letter, then at Keon. He stood there, his eyes cold as ice, but hiding a deep sadness. I had expected the feeling of freedom, the feeling of being liberated. But what I felt was an absolute emptiness, a sharp pain in my heart. I had gotten used to his presence, used to the man's sandalwood and leather scent, used to the way he protected me. I had loved him. I had loved this powerful, ruthless, but also extremely protective man. "And what about you, Kian?" I asked, my voice trembling. He said nothing, only slowly approached me, raising his hand to touch my cheek. His finger gently stroked my skin, a warm sensation spreading. "I cannot change who I am, Amelia," he whispered, his voice husky, "but I can change the world around you." And he did. Kian gradually transitioned the man's business activities, from darkness to light. He created a new empire, no longer based on violence and fear, but on power and influence. He built support centers for abused women and children, turning his personal obsession into a noble mission. He broke every rule of the underworld to create a new world for me. I did not leave. I chose to stay. I chose Kian. Because I knew he was not just a ruthless tycoon, but a man with a deeply wounded heart, a person who found redemption through my love and protection. A few years later, we married. A small, cozy wedding, only the closest people. I wore a pure white wedding dress, standing beside Kian, my man of power, the man who changed his whole world for me. He, in an elegant black suit, looked at me with eyes full of love and protection. His sandalwood scent, now, was no longer just luxury or danger, but the smell of safety, of happiness. Kian was no longer the tycoon I once met in the dark office. He still maintained his authority, his sharpness in every decision, but now there was a softness, a warmth emanating from the man. He had found peace, and so had I. Leo was the best man, grown up, strong, and happy. The old mansion was now a real home, full of laughter and light. I brought him what he needed: gentleness, understanding, and a pure heart that could see through the man's cold shell. And he brought me what I longed for: absolute safety, a family, and a love so strong it could conquer all darkness. 5 years later, we welcomed a baby girl, with my deep blue eyes and Kian's jet black hair. When Kian held the little one in his arms, I saw a tear roll down his cheek, a tear of peace and happiness. The man had found complete atonement, a family to protect, a future to build. Sometimes, I still wonder, is my life too much like a dark fairy tale? A poor girl rescued by a dark king, and they lived happily ever after. But I know, our story is more than that. It was a journey full of hardship, tears, and blood, but it ultimately led to redemption, transformation, and a love so strong it could melt even the hardest hearts of stone. And I know, when Kian looks at me, his eyes will still say the same thing: "You belong to me." But now, that is no longer a sentence. That is a promise of eternal happiness, of absolute safety in the world he created for me. That is our love, a dark, romantic, eternal, and indestructible symphony.